Now, innovation is the part of F1 that a lot of people love. You know, a cheap hack here, a little bit of an exploit there, anything to get half a tenth in some cases. And in the good old days of the 90s and into the early 2000s, the teams would have happily spent millions for that extra little bit. But nothing caused quite a storm in the latter part of the first decade of the 2000s than an aerodynamic trick that was utilised by 3 teams that all seemed to have the same idea. Or did they? Now, to get an idea as to what started all this, we need to go back to 2007 when the cars looked something like this. They were aggressive looking, they revved to stupid amounts of RPM, they had a load of downforce, and then the team started sticking appendages on them to generate more downforce and cut a nice healthy hole in the air because speed. And one of the teams on the grid that year was the Super Aguri team, set up by former F1 driver Aguri Suzuki, and sort of acted like Honda's B team and was there to field an all-Japanese lineup. But Anthony Davidson joined the team for their second season in 2007, and they also had Frank Montagny after Yuji Ide, the meme lord himself, was kicked out of the sport for being too bad. And while they were considered to be a team that would just be relegated to the back of the field, they shocked the F1 world when Takuma Sato went on a blistering run in Canada, sticking one on then champion Fernando Alonso at the chicane and finished 6th, adding to a point he'd already scored in Spain because it was just the top 8 that scored points in those days. But then into 2008, things started to go a little bit wrong for the team. Money started to dry up and they never launched their new car due to uncertainty over the future of the team, even going as far as to not turn up to pre-season testing due to parts not being delivered on time. But they did use the car they planned to use, if only for the first 4 races of the season before leaving the sport with immediate effect after the Spanish Grand Prix. Now, even though it was a Japanese registered team, the Super Aguri operation itself was run out of England, in what we call Motorsport Valley. It's sort of a corridor between Birmingham and Oxford where most of the F1 teams reside, part suppliers like Extract reside, ProDriver in there, Silverstone's in there, and a myriad of other stuff. So, when these mechanics and engineers and people like that lost their jobs, it meant that they could potentially find work elsewhere pretty easily without having to move. And some of the lucky ones who were able to get new jobs ended up at either Honda, Williams, or Toyota. And most of them started their new jobs immediately because the rules were relaxed because a team had just gone bust. And this is while development of the 2009 cars was an ongoing process. So they were actually able to have an input on the 2009 cars, which were going to have all new bodywork due to an absolutely massive rule change. The cars were now going to have design cues last seen in the 90s, smoother bodywork, higher nose cones, full slick tyres, and less aero. But apparently some of the engineers over at Super Aguri had got an idea that could have potentially been used even under the 2008 rules, and while you're not exactly allowed to take plans to another team, you are allowed to take an idea because there's just no way of policing that kind of thing. So you can imagine it ended up being like that scene from Die Hard where Ellis is talking to Hans Gruber and basically saying, "Frank, booby, you want to make some extra downforce?" What Honda had realised is that with these new rules they'd be stalling the rear diffuser a lot, and this was deliberate from the FIA, and they'd also made it so the front produced more downforce than the rear to try and slow the cars down by making them a bit more twitchy, as it were. And at Honda it was a Japanese aerodynamicist who initially proposed the idea, and apparently he had come from Super Aguri, saying that you could create openings in the diffuser to try and expand on the volume of air that went through that diffuser. Now, it's said that this was all discovered by accident by a Japanese engineer who had gone from Super Aguri over to Honda. And what had happened was this engineer had been reading the rulebook in English, as it was, written in English, and then translating it into his native Japanese so it was easier for him to understand. And through the translation, he'd basically come up with this idea of exploiting this, what he thought was a hole in the rulebook, of making the diffuser act in such a way that you could get more air coming through it and therefore produce more downforce. So he then suggested this idea to John Owen, who was the head of aerodynamics at Honda at that time, and also to Nick Fry. And then when they finally came around to look at the rulebook for themselves, they went, "Oh my god, the FIA's left a huge open goal here." It later turned out, as Owen explained to ESPN, that Honda sort of already knew about this glaring hole in the regulations, and in the technical working group meetings they'd expressed concern that a massive loophole like this would undo the FIA's plans of the rear of the car producing less downforce than before. But all the other teams thought they were making things up and just scaremongering the FIA, because Honda in 2007 and 2008 wasn't exactly the best team on the grid. Now, I do apologise if any of the drawings I've created for this are, low tech and low budget and very basic, but as you might be aware, licensing the images of technical drawings is many expensive. They wanted 350 quid for a picture of that second brake pedal that McLaren was using. That ain't made of money. So then, the 2009 regulations stated that the diffuser dimensions must be a maximum of 1000mm wide, 175mm tall, and 350mm long. But there was also the added matter of Article 3.12.7 of the technical regulations, which said, no bodywork which is visible from beneath the car and which lies between the rear wheel centre line and a point 350mm rearward of it may be more than 175mm above the reference plane. Any intersection of the surfaces in this area with a lateral or longitudinal vertical plane should form one continuous line which is visible from beneath the car. Which makes no sense whatsoever, right? But it's not the first time a team has exploited the words reference plane. At the 1999 Malaysian Grand Prix, the two Ferraris of Eddie Irvine and Michael Schumacher were initially disqualified from the race because their barge boards were supposedly too big, therefore shifting more air, which in turn handed Hakkinen his second driver's title before the season was even over. But while Ross Brawn initially held his hands up and said, yes, our barge boards were too big at the International Court of Appeal, he then stated that while the barge board was illegal when the FIA measured it on that day, he then pointed out that normally the FIA measures it from a different point, where, upon measuring, the barge board was totally within the regulations. The FIA said, yep, you've got a point, we've made a mistake, we normally measure it from this point for everybody else at every other race, here's your points back, we'll see you in Japan. So using the same way of thinking, Honda, Williams and Toyota, Brawn working for Honda at the time, got to work at exploiting this glaring hole in the rulebook. At the start of the 2009 season, the other teams such as Renault had a diffuser that looks something like this. Now the diffuser works by creating a low pressure pocket at the rear of the car that helps suck the rear to the ground. It's very basic, but it's something that does the job. But what Williams, Toyota and Honda were working on is something that looked more like this. Because of that rule saying we're only measuring from one dimension, the diffuser was as long, wide and tall as it could be, but crucially, the middle part of the diffuser stopped sooner, and the three teams extended the floor into this upper part to create a method of sending more air through the whole system, and therefore creating more downforce. The centre part of the design of the double diffuser was an exploitation of a rule that allowed extra bodywork within a 150mm centre section of the car. The teams also designed their rear crash structure to take advantage of this. But at the end of the 2008 season, Honda abruptly pulled out, citing the global financial recession as the cause of this decision. Now, Ross Brawn managed to do some dealings. He managed to buy the team off Honda and managed to get a team together, and Honda said, okay, we'll give you the money to get you through the season, but after that, no more, you're on your own, which, that was nice of them. But crucially and somewhat thankfully, the car had been designed and built already, so Brawn didn't need to do anything beyond that. So he was running what Honda would have brought to the season for 2009. I mean, they did shoehorn a Mercedes engine in the back, and then in pre-season testing, Button and Barrichello were setting brilliant lap times. And then Button went and won the season opener in Australia, with many thinking that this new rear aero package was the main reason for it all. As you can imagine, the other teams weren't particularly happy with this. One team had got a significant advantage over everybody else. Two, they thought this diffuser was too big, given the regulations stating that it could only be this by this by this. And the other thing being, designing our own version of this is going to take up a lot of our time and money. But while the teams did file formal protests, the FIA said that Brawn, Toyota and Williams were not in breach of the rules and would be able to continue, and the double diffuser would remain legal for the rest of the season. McLaren brought their own version for the Chinese Grand Prix, and the other teams slowly introduced theirs. But Red Bull had a few more problems given the way the rear end of their car was packaged. They were using pull rod suspension that was connected to the gearbox in a significant way, and the way that they were going for like a size 0 design at the back, it meant that getting a double diffuser in on that package was proving to be quite difficult. Red Bull wasn't able to debut its system until a little bit later than its rivals, and even then it needed to iron out some kinks in the system. But by the middle of 2009, sort of around the British Grand Prix or so, the RB5 had become the fastest car on the grid. But the early season dominance by Brawn meant that the gap was too big for them to catch up, and Brawn and Button had the championship won at the second last round in Brazil. However, despite the controversy that the double diffuser caused in the early part of the 2009 season, the FIA allowed the teams to keep running them through the 2010 season, after which they would be banned. So why did they eventually ban it, leading to the rise of blown diffusers and things like that? Well, there's two reasons. There's the technical reason, which is the more believable version of the two, and then there's the political reasons. So starting with the technical reasons, now the 2009 rule changes were brought through the F1 technical working group trying to improve overtaking. Through the discussions, they came up with these regulations and decided that one way of trying to slow the cars down and mitigate dirty air and stuff was to make the rear diffusers and rear wings smaller to, get rid of that dirty air coming off the backs of the cars. But what had happened is, through the writing of the rulebook, is that 3 teams using ex-employees of a previous one were able to exploit the hole in the rulebook, so the diffusers ended up being bigger with more downforce as opposed to smaller with less, which completely went against what the technical working group was aiming for. The second part is, and this is all alleged as well as being in 2 parts I guess, is that Mosley wanted Ferrari to sweat. Now Ferrari was the team that led the protests against the double diffuser, and some people were thinking that Ferrari would use its veto power to get rid of these double diffusers, and they and McLaren were the 2 main teams to lose out because of these double diffusers and the 2009 regulations. At the same time, there were the threats of Ferrari forming its breakaway series, and Mosley was essentially not giving in to Ferrari's threats of give us what we want or we walk. Calling their bluff as it were, and almost saying, okay, off you go then, see ya. And Luca's foot stomping is thought to have been why Mosley allowed the use of the diffusers in the first place. That's part A of it anyway, but I don't really believe that. Now, the second part of all this is that it was the underdog team that benefited from it all, and the underdog team rising up against Ferrari and McLaren and beating them would have been brilliant for the sport and brilliant for ratings. And to this day, the whole Brawn and 2009 thing remains F1's true underdog story. The team that almost didn't exist in January going on to win the World Championship, and as a bonus fact, it's the only time that 2 English drivers have won championships back to back, and they did it with the same number as well. Because of McLaren being kicked out in 2007, Hamilton won with 22 on his car, and then the following year Button won with 22 on his car. I mean, there was Graham Hill winning the championship and then Jackie Stewart, but that was English and Scottish, or British and British. This was English and English. I'm all about the bonus facts here, ladies and gentlemen, but either way, it's still Formula One's great underdog story, and it's a season that a lot of people go back and watch because of that fact. So then, the story of how the double diffuser in Formula 1 came to be. If you have learned something new here today, then give the video a like. And if you want more stuff like this and you're not already, get subscribed and also get that bell on as well, so you never miss out on a future video. Massive thanks to the good folk of Patreon who continue to support the channel. If you do want to help support me in buying up images and that kind of thing, you can find a link to Patreon in the description, as well as finding links down there to Discord and also to my socials. So until next time, I've been AdmiralLaWind. Have a great day wherever you live in the world, and I'll see you all again on Sunday for the next round of the Potato Nation Sunday League, or on Monday for another video if you're not into the whole live streaming thing. So either way, until Sunday or until Monday, goodbye.